All right, good morning. It looks like sufficient people have arrived. This is Municipality of Anchorage's Municipality Assembly Reapportionment Committee. This meeting is Thursday, January 6, 2022, 11 a.m. scheduled to 12:30. Madam Clerk, would you please take the roll?
Mr. Constant?
Here.
Mr. Peterson?
Present.
Ms. Kennedy?
Here.
Ms. Quinn Davidson?
Here. Good morning.
And then for assembly members not on the committee, Ms. Allard?
Here.
Mr. Dunbar? Ms. LaFrance? Mr. Perez Verdia? Mr. Rivera?
Present. And I just want to state, I just talked with Chair LaFrance a few minutes ago, and it does look like I will be joining this committee to represent Midtown. Thanks.
And I'll brief folks on that once the roll is done.
Mr. Weddleton?
Here.
Ms. Salatel? Thank you, Chair.
All right, sounds like we have a quorum, and just what you heard Mr. Rivera note there to the members and members of the public as well. A question was raised over the course of the last month, like how does Midtown get its voice heard in the process of this reapportionment process at the committee level? And so in consultation with the chair, it was determined that we should increase the membership of the committee to be one member from each of the 6 districts. And so officially going forward, we will amend the agenda and add Mr. Weddleton for South Anchorage and Mr. Rivera for Midtown, which then provides that every district has at least one member on the committee. So that's kind of our new structure going forward. And with that, let's just briefly go over the agenda. I think for the record, maybe we would also invite to say hello if they're here, members from RDI, the consulting firm.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We are here.
All right, and that is RDI, Mr. Wheeler. I'll say your name for you, Dennis Wheeler. Okay, with that, we have an agenda that includes 6 new business items and then a brief review of old items, ongoing business. And I'll just briefly walk through the items on the agenda. We have A, review and finalize revised timeline. B, discuss process for submitting draft documents to full assembly. C, ESRI training to look up map details by RDI. D, briefing from RDI on each map. E, discuss process for public map submission review. And then F, discuss how to share third-party resources and websites. In the ongoing business category, timeline updates, see above, communications plan, budget conversations, and any information on the state final plan adoption. So those are the items on the agenda. Any of the members of the committee wish to add anything?
Mr. Chair.
Yep, Ms. Kennedy.
Thank you. I just kind of wanted to maybe comment on yesterday's presentation with the Chugaki River Chamber of Commerce, but we can do that as an aside, or you can add it to the agenda. But anyway, I have a few comments. Thanks.
So I think that why don't we put that under the 5B, which is communications plan update.
Thank you.
Perfect. And then what we'll do as a standing item when we do these public outreach efforts as individual members, we'll do briefings on what happened there at that item. That's a good question. Thank you. Anyone else? Hearing and seeing none. Ms. Quinn Davidson.
Oh, just a quick note that I saw in the chat that Ms. LaFrance is here, and I didn't know if you saw that.
I did not see that. Thank you, Ms. LaFrance. Arrived at 11:04 a.m. Just 1 minute ago. Thank you, Ms. Quinn Davidson. So all that being said, without any other input, that's the agenda we're going to be moving through today. It's very packed, lots of items. So Ms. Ross, Claire Ross, would you go ahead and put up, if you can, or Mandy on her behalf, the revised proposed timeline? Or proposed revised timeline? There were.
Do you want me to do that, or do you have it? Oh, perfect.
Okay, is this the one? I know there were several.
Yes, this is the most recent.
Okay, thank you. So There were some issues, just so folks can understand, in getting the first maps and the initial process published. And because it happened over the holidays, we were in discussions about how we didn't want to force people to rush at the very beginning of the year to this January 10 deadline, which would be 4 days from now, having only presented to the public the initial maps late in December as opposed to early in December as had been intended. And there were just some wrinkles that had to be ironed out in methodologies and mapping and software and everything that finally were ironed out. And so with that said, we've essentially shifted back much of the calendar to a new proposed timeline. So Claire, would you go ahead and walk us through it?
Sure thing. So we're at our January 6th meeting. Then we moved the deadline for submission of third-party maps to the 20th, which is a Thursday. And then having the town halls the following week on a Wednesday and Thursday. There is an assembly meeting that Tuesday, but we had already had a cram schedule in our original draft, so hopefully people will be okay with that again. We were planning to have the first one at LUSAC and the second one virtual, but I was thinking if you're tired from the meeting on Tuesday, we could switch that up and do the LUSAC one on Thursday, so we could discuss that. And then the committee meeting to discuss the town hall, we had thought about the 31st, which is a Monday, or this would be a little more packed schedule, but some people were out of town that week. And so I think having it on the 28th would allow full committee participation. And then from there, we're hoping to get it on the February 15th agenda for that meeting for introduction. It'll have 2 public hearings. And there's a problem with February and March just have weird alignment of when the assembly meetings fall. And so it was kind of tricky to get this to occur where it wasn't rushed, but it wasn't 2 or 3 weeks in between action items. And so this is the best shot, our best guess of giving everyone a chance to mull over each step, but not having it drag on for months and months. And then on the next page, there's some other dates, or we can just review the dates we've gone through so far.
No, let's just walk through the whole. There you go.
So then having, there's one addition about having a special meeting on February 23rd or the 24th to have the first public hearing, since there's not an assembly meeting in late February. And so by adding that meeting, we could have the 2 public hearings and then have the second public hearing and adoption on March 1st. That gives us also March 15th. If you don't get it done by the 1st, then there's also the meeting on the 15th, or you could carry over the meeting on the 1st to the 2nd and 3rd, etc., until it's finished.
All right, so before us now is this draft amended calendar. It just shifts everything approximately 2 weeks back due to considerations relating to the initial publication of draft maps and getting things organized on the front end. And so is there any input or questions that we should consider before adopting this new calendar?
Mr. Constant, I have some thoughts if there's
Yep.
no one ahead in the queue.
Please go ahead.
Have
Ms.
you
Anderson.
spoken with the contractor to ensure this schedule works? I really don't want to have to push it back again because I think it's just fair to the public.
So
Things
did.
and, okay.
And here's the one area that they raised a concern about, and I'll share that. And that is on that deadline for submission of third-party maps to the town halls. There's a 6-day period there, 6-7 days. And their concern that they raised was, or the flag, yellow flag, not a red flag, was that if a huge number of maps are delivered to us by third parties, that timeline could be very difficult for them to meet, getting them inputted into the system, getting them set up, and us getting them printed in large format so that they can become available. But other than that, which we think we can work with, there were no concerns raised. And we did thoughtfully have that conversation about, we don't want to do this again. So does this work? And the answer was yes. And if you want to hear from the contractor, they're here.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. I guess that's a big if that, if they can produce those maps. I guess I'd like to hear them say that they will produce those maps by the town hall. We're already behind a couple weeks because we got the maps late, and we've been talking about to the public about this coming forward. So I guess I'd like to hear from Dennis a commitment to getting those done by the town hall. I mean, if there are hundreds of maps or something, that's one thing, but I'm guessing there won't be. I don't actually know, but so I guess I'd like to hear from Dennis a commitment to sticking to this timeline.
Right, Dennis.
Yeah.
Thank
Sorry,
you, Mr.
let me cut you off.
Chair.
Go
Yeah,
ahead.
no worries. To answer the question, I would anticipate no issues, given what I suspect will happen in terms of the number of maps. But I did raise this issue with the chair yesterday that if we had a large volume of maps, that would overwhelm our ability to produce them in time. So I don't have a hard number. Ashley may have some thoughts on this, but I would assume if it's something in the 10 to 15 map range, we should be fine. If it's more than that, then we may need to talk about changing our town halls, or we may be able to provide some information regarding those maps, even though we may not be able to produce everything we'd like to produce about those maps for the town hall.
And oh, go ahead. Was that you, Claire?
I can just add to that to alleviate some of your concerns. The flag or the issue would be that if the majority of public submissions held off until that final date, we expect that they will trickle in and come in throughout the month of January. So it won't be that we will be producing every map that was submitted, or we don't anticipate that to be the case between those 6 days.
And I would just note that's Ashley Reiser for the record. And Ms. Quinn-Davidson.
Oh, yeah, sorry for interrupting, Mr. Constant. That sounds great. Thank you for speaking to that, all of you. And it sounds like it's going to work out unless we have some sort of unforeseen circumstances, but I guess we'll see who submits maps. I have a couple other thoughts, but if someone else is waiting, I can jump in after them.
There's no one in the queue.
Oh, okay. I had spoken with Claire about the 31st. I am going to be out of town and unable to call in the week of the 31st. So I guess I have some questions about what we'd be doing in that meeting afterward. If that would be the chance for the committee to really dive into what we've heard and to everything we've been considering and make a plan of what plan or plans. And that's another question I have for Mr. Constant. How many do we plan to put forward? If that's really the opportunity to dive in and do that, I would appreciate the committee meeting on the 28th so that we could get it done before I leave, or at least I could participate in the beginning of it.
Yeah, and so thank you. Looking at the calendar, that is the time. So I have no objection. I don't know if anyone does, of us starting on the early part of the calendar and then seeing where that drives us. Is there any objection to the 28th as opposed to the 31st? Hearing none, we'll go with the 28th, Claire. And so further questions, Ms. Quinn-Davidson?
Can you talk a little bit, Mr. Constant, about what we would do on between the 28th and 4th? And do we plan to on the 28th to try to select a map that the committee wants, or selecting multiple maps? I just kind of want to understand the process so we can describe it to people.
So that is the next item on the agenda, B, discuss process for submitting draft documents to full assembly. And so I would like to wrap up the calendar conversation first, but ultimately this committee will decide what that process is, hopefully briefly now and over the next couple of meetings. And so if you don't mind, I'll run through the queue if the questions are relating to the timeline, and then we will come back to your question as item B.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Weddleton.
Thanks. So, just something that jumped out to me is on February 15th, introduce final plan. And I think that word's not really appropriate.
Yeah.
Because it kind of plays into, you've already decided, whereas there'll be a public hearing.
Agreed.
After this. So
we'll update
introduce
that.
Proposed plan.
Yeah, that's it. A plan or plans, why don't we just put introduce ordinance?
Got it.
Well, we know what that means. General public may not, so I think it's fine to say plan, but just not final,
Yeah, it isn't final until it's done. Okay, we'll get that updated. Is there anything else, John?
You know, so a special meeting on it just a week or 9 days later, then a work session, then second public hearing. Okay, yeah, I think that's appropriate. That looks good, thanks.
What we did there, the reason we thought of the special meeting is because if we don't, then we continue pushing back by 2 weeks, you know, and it just gets more difficult in time. And so the idea is we'll have that first public hearing at a special meeting. We'll announce it very broadly. People will understand, and the second public hearing will follow at the next meeting, the next regular meeting. So, Mr.
Yeah,
Rivera.
2 public hearings is real good. Glad to see that.
Yeah, that's definitely the work plan. Mr. Rivera.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So a couple things. First is, could you describe to me sort of the March 3rd, 15th, and 24th, sort of what the expectation is there? Because as I understand it, that'll be after we voted on the plan.
Yeah, so the answer is maybe we will have voted on the plan. As we're all aware, on when we have a public hearing and an item up for consideration, sometimes nights get long and the work doesn't get done. And so we left open the possibility that it's going to take more time. And if it takes more time, we're just identifying the possibility of a committee meeting to do any potential additional work addressing concerns or other matters, right? So we don't have a specific content for the March 3rd. We're just letting folks know that if the meeting goes on past the 1st and there's other considerations that need to be addressed, there is the possibility of a committee meeting to address that. So then the 15th is, if we don't get through the item on the 1st, it could immediately fall to the 11s or the 13s on the agenda for the 15th, or we could do continued meetings. Those conversations would be had with the chair. And then finally, a committee meeting to wrap up and make recommendations, I think is self-explanatory, but we can explain it a little bit. The thought is, once we've done our process, it's adopted, and it doesn't have to be the 24th, it could be after. The idea is to have a debrief and create an archive, if you will, to move forward to the assembly in 2032, right? And so, or 2031, so that we communicate well forward our intent and what we thought, so they have that advice going forward. So it's just an opportunity to debrief and thoughtfully repackage.
Got it. Okay, so advice for when Dick Cheney is back on the assembly. Good to know. So the second point that I had, and you addressed it already with that March 3rd committee meeting. I know I am months late to this process, but it looked to me a little weird that we had a work session sort of in between the first and second public hearing. Glad to hear that we have that committee meeting, though. So if there's any issues in that second public hearing and we don't vote on it on March 1st, that we can deal with that on that March 3rd meeting. So was an issue that I wanted to bring up, but looks like it's been addressed. Thanks.
Yeah, we're doing our best to build in as many off-ramps and on-ramps as needed to get there in a timely and thoughtful manner. Okay, Mr. Gates.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. I was also planning to ask about the use of the term final plan for that February 15th meeting. And I'm sorry if I might have missed it. Mr. Weddleton asked about using that also. But I guess maybe there's some different words. If I'm understanding right, it's the committee's recommended for plan to the body. So maybe some other title like committee's recommended plan or committee's final recommendation plan or something like that.
Yep.
I also wondered, is the plan here for the introduction a single ordinance with the committee's recommendation, a single map, or will there be like some options that are introduced at the same time? And you could do it a number of ways. Either of those is fine.
Right. And so, Dean, the answer to that question is item B, 4B on the agenda, which we'll move to. Ms. Quinn Davidson led us there, but I held us back until we're done with the calendar talk. So once we're done with item 4A, we'll move into 4B.
Oh, thank you. Sorry to jump ahead.
Yeah, no problem. It's the obvious next question, which is why it ended up on the agenda. We're like, huh. So anything else on the timeline? So I'm just going to ask for unanimous consent. And is there any objection to this timeline as presented?
I'm sorry, one more question, Mr. Constant.
Yep. Go ahead.
I think we had discussed before making one of the town halls Zoom or Teams so that people could participate who didn't want to come in person, and probably with Omicron that makes even more sense. And then one of the town halls being in person at the LUSAC.
Yes.
Should we, it would be nice probably soon to determine which is which and calendar them as such so that people can make plans.
Absolutely.
I don't care which is which, but just
so
maybe.
Is there a preference, members of the committee, to speak up the first one or the second one virtual?
I was thinking maybe the first one just to give us a break since we will be in chambers the day before, but honestly, it doesn't really matter.
Can I see Ms. Kennedy, you're in the queue. Was it for this item?
No, not really, but if you want
Okay.
an opinion, I don't really care either.
Yeah, I don't either. But, you know, frankly, I believe we should have, even in our in-person one, a Zoom that goes out or Teams that goes out. So both of them will have a virtual element, but one of them will be primarily virtual. And so I heard Ms. Quinn Davidson suggest the next night being a break. So it being the virtual one, is there any alternate opinion to that? A dissenting opinion? I'm hearing no objection. So it appears that the draft plan is to have the first town hall to be the Teams one and the second one to be in person.
This is Claire. I have an email out to the library to see if those dates are available. So we'll plan on what you said, but pending availability of the space at the library.
Okay, so with that consideration on the table, is there any objection to the timeline as proposed and presented? Hearing no objection, we'll consider this timeline adopted by the committee and ready for publication. Thanks. Now let's move on to the second item on the agenda, which is the process for submitting draft documents to the full assembly.
Mr. Chair.
Oh, Ms. Kennedy, go ahead.
Sorry, yeah, I was in the queue because I did want to just comment that I still have the intent of having something out in Chugach Eagle River. And I don't have a date. I was really waiting for us to have some kind of a date formalized for all the other dates. So I just want to make sure that nobody has an objection to that. But I imagine it will be sometime after those town halls. So it could be that last week or the beginning of the first week of February. But anyway, just if anybody had some thoughts on that, that'd be fine. But that's kind of where I'm thinking. Thanks.
Yeah, for my part, I think the more the merrier. So everybody who wants to take out and do a show on this is better, but I see Claire has her hand raised.
Oh, I was just gonna say, Miss Kennedy, if once you get that scheduled, let me know and I can make sure to get it on all of our promotional materials. And if any other assembly members want to do one at a coffee shop or anywhere in your neighborhoods, I can help support that.
Okay,
Yeah,
great,
so
thank you.
I think the answer, again, unless there's some objection, is the more the merrier. Let's do as many of these as we can. If you're interested, we have the maps. They'll be in your hands. I believe I saw them on some video last night at an event in Eagle River, which is great. And so the work is happening. It's percolating out. Let's push it out as hard as we can so the public is informed. Okay, next we'll move on to item B, which is discuss process for submitting draft documents to the full assembly. There are a number of potential ways to do this. The leadership in discussion with staff did not come up with a proposed solution. One idea is let's all adopt as a committee one substitute to move forward. The second idea is much like with the cannabis licensing, let's do the checkbox process with a number of maps. That's a possibility. The other idea is do one map forward and members of the committee or members of the assembly can move by amendment, which is always the right alternatives. So this is the opportunity for the committee to discuss. If anyone wants to jump in the queue, I see Ms. Quinn Davidson is in the queue. You have the floor.
Thanks, Mr. Constant. I'll be interested to hear what other committee members think. I kind of view our role as reviewing everything and then putting forward what we think is the best option. We're here in committee, we're spending this time to get familiar with the maps and figure out what we think is best. And then any other member could bring another one separately if they wanted to, including members who are not on the committee.
Was that it, Ms. Quinn Davidson?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Mr. Weddleton. If you're speaking, you're on mute, John.
Sorry, slow phone. You know, on that, I'd agree with Austin. I think we should come forward with one, but you know, the AIM could be extensive, and if not actually show maps, maybe show links to maps that were proposed, and then rationale for coming up with the one that's proposed.
Did you mean AM or AIM?
AM, whatever. So whatever supporting
Yeah.
document.
Okay, yeah, we could do it either way, but okay, thank you. And Mr. Rivera?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. My comments are similar to Mr. Weddleton. I think it's I agree with both Mr. Weddleton and Ms. Quinn Davidson. I think the most efficient route for this committee would to, in the end, have one map and really do all of the work to get to that. Show, I think it's important, though, for us to show all the versions and why others were rejected. And then, you know, I think as much as possible, hopefully there's mechanisms in place to get feedback from members even before we vote on that recommendation of that one map to the full body. That way we can incorporate as much as possible and get that feedback so that hopefully it's less contentious when it gets to the full body, but who knows? Thanks.
So, Madam Clerk, can you please roll back to the timeline quickly? So I just want to put that question in the context of the timeline. So when we come to the item that is going to change its title from introduce final plan, I think that we have the town halls, then we have the committee meeting to review the plans, then we have the introduction. And so your question argues for a work session in that timeline, or all members committing to attend that committee meeting. So I think that the answer to your question is it depends on which structure we choose. We already have that committee meeting established, so it can function as a work session essentially. Okay, so I think that's a matter of consideration for the committee. The latter idea, why don't you go ahead and speak, Mr. Rivera?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I like that latter idea. Since there is already a committee meeting established, why don't we just invite everyone? Hey, this is a committee meeting where everyone wants to show up to give your thoughts.
Okay, so then we can swap back over to the agenda and I'll hand the floor to Ms. Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, I guess I just kind of had a thought about the idea of trying to come forward or bring forward on the agenda one plan that we all agree with. And I think that might be more challenging than we think. I know just, you know, everybody's district is going to change somewhat. Some of the plans I've seen obviously changed the Midtown district quite dramatically, my district quite dramatically. Potentially South District, you know, District 6 quite dramatically. So anyway, so, you know, I think it's wishful thinking, or we can be hopeful that we can come up with some plan that seems to work for everybody. But I think we have to recognize that reality of it is that whatever we bring forward is probably going to be subjected to quite a few amendments by the time it really does get to the floor where we're deliberating on it. So I guess I'm kind of, you know, trying to prepare myself for what that could look like, just in terms of what other amendments might come through. But that's what makes this whole process a bit wonky, is we can do all this legwork in advance in that, but we all know that it's going to come down to, you know, the 11th hour where we're all throwing out amendments at you know, at different points of the final deliberation. And so to a certain extent, it's kind of like all bets are off at that point. So anyway, I'm trying to be kind of realistic about how this really could go in the end. So I don't know that I'm quite so married to the idea of having to come forward from this committee with a plan. knowing that, maybe we'll have to actually vote on it and say, well, this many members support this plan, this many members don't, or something like that. But again, like I said, I know that amendments are going to come forward at the end inevitably. So
Crystal, you raised a question there, and I see that Dean has his hand up, or maybe, yeah, he has his hand up, but I also want to briefly hear from the consultants, a question I haven't briefed them with, which raises a little concern why I would be crazy and ask a question in open session, but I'm going to. And that question is to the consultants. When you think about map making and think about this process as we go, we have an idea where we submit a map through the committee to the body that is subject to amendment. The question is, are you prepared, or have you thought through the process of map making on the fly at a public hearing, after a public hearing is closed in a deliberation?
Mr. Chairman, this is Dennis Wheeler. What I would say is we should try our best to avoid that as much as possible, because then everybody in chambers is waiting for us to work up the map changes, see what the deviation looks like, as well as any Voting Rights Act concerns regarding minority representation. So it could really get bogged down. I mean, obviously people may have last minute amendments, but hopefully we can make last minute maybe, the day before or 2 days before, to give us time to work those up for them.
So I think then the answer to that issue is that the committee will establish a protocol that sets timelines, and of course any member can make a motion, but once everyone is in agreement generally of the process, we'll do our best to follow that process, just like we do with laid on the table items or other things. We can set that up. So Mr. Gates, you have your hand up.
No, I've taken my hand down. You guys, Mr. Wheeler just addressed my question.
Perfect, thank you. So I am looking in the queue. I see Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I just wanted to mention that there's a good chance, no matter what map we come up with, even if we vote unanimously on it, that it's going to end up in court. And so, the final map may be something that we actually didn't vote on, but that's just the process, and we don't, of course, know that at this point in time, but that certainly is a possibility going forward. Thank you.
Absolutely, yeah, thank you. And I believe that we'll pretty much have the same requirements put in place where the state has a limited time frame for legal challenges. We'll probably be having a discussion with legal on how to ensure that our process has the same limitations, but I would gather the courts would not draw maps. They would refer maps back to us for further action if they had disagreements, or if the disagreements that were brought to them were upheld. And so there's a legal process that's coda to all of that timeline. Thank you, Mr. Peterson, for that. Mr. Welton.
Thanks. I was thinking on, if we come forward with one map and then people, I'm trying to think how amendments would work, and it would be, swap this neighborhood for that. It seems like it'd be really hard to handle. It almost seems better that, we're one to be brought forward than if someone has an alternative to make that, an S1 version. So maybe there's an S1 and S2 that'll be in the, maybe in the packet at the time it's all introduced even, but you'd have alternatives supported by different members. Otherwise I'm just trying to contemplate what would an amendment look like, if we had, one map. How do you amend that map? It just seems like that would be tricky.
All right. Yeah, I get that. That's why I asked the question of the contractor. I can't even imagine. So Ms. Quinn Davidson.
Thanks, Mr. Constant, and everyone else too. I think this is a good discussion. There's pros and cons. What I'm ultimately worried about is if we have a bunch of maps at the assembly, I think it's going to be completely chaotic. And I think our job as the committee is to try to manage that with all the information we have while the contractor is here. We have sort of months of work leading up to it at our benefit. So I think with that, I move that we submit one map agreed upon by the committee to the body as a whole for decision.
So we have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion is made and seconded. Before we move into the deliberations, I see Dean has his hand up for a comment, and I want to see if it's germane to this.
Whoops, I was muted. Sorry, I missed the exact wording of Mrs. Quinn Davidson's motion, but I asked a comment after Mr. Worthington, and I think that's sort of dovetailing with what Mr. Wheeler said. It would be really important that we don't have amendments on the floor that are moving a boundary line between districts this way or that way for a map that's before you, because that would get really messy, and plus the data that we need from the contractor isn't going to be feasible in the middle of the meeting. So I think it's really important that, you know, the committee send a message to all the assembly members that any individual assembly member that wants to, you know, change what maps are before you, meet with the contractor themselves individually to prepare our map, you know, days before the assembly meeting. And the way I see amendments working, John, and you know, this is just how I think I might be efficient, is if the amendment is, here's my proposed map, and rather than moving a boundary line, whatever they did before a few days ahead of time, with the amendment saying, you know, replace that map with mine, map Weddleton number 5 or 6, whatever. And rather than trying to amend lines and so forth, you're just doing an amendment that replaces the map with the one prepared with the contractor ahead of time. And well, I mean, I'm just sort of thinking out loud, so I invite Mr. Wheeler to add or whatever would be most efficient. But the timeline and the timeliness of this and being able to get the work done ahead before the meeting night is very important. I was looking back to 2012. We had a map that was adopted and we had amendments that were desired, but we did a whole new ordinance and 2 meetings later adopted the changes to the boundary. And it would be nice to avoid going through that kind of exercise.
And I think that is really germane to the motion that's on the floor. So there is a motion on the floor that is to submit a single map from the committee. Any other discussion on this item? Please put yourself in the queue. Ms. Kennedy.
Thank you. You know, I'm not going to vote for this because I think what we need to do is provide enough flexibility in this process that we don't tie ourselves down. It very well may be that there are 2 or 3 different maps that work in some way or form for some of us. And so it might actually be better for us to just basically make a recommendation of our top 3, for instance. And then when it comes down to actually voting, then it'll be a simple majority rules kind of a vote. So I don't know that we want to basically say, nope, we're just going to have one map and that's it and nothing else matters. I just have some real concerns about doing that when there are so many different things to think about in this process. And especially when we're so new to it right now. I mean, none of us have made any comments about, you know, what we like or don't like about any of the maps that are out there right now. Now I'm hearing stuff from my community, just little bits at a time, you know, no big rush. Nobody's really coming forward with a lot to say yet. But anyway, so I would just hesitate to say that at this point, we're going to decide we're going to have one map and that's it. So I won't be supporting the idea of coming forward with one. Thanks.
And just a note to your point about no in-depth review of maps, and you know, it's still early in that sense. Item C will be a briefing on how assembly members can log in and look through the maps. And item D will be a briefing on each map. And then the next 2 items, process for public map submission. And then the final one is clearinghouse for information from third parties on various maps and options. And so I think we'll get to the kind of more substantive parts of that part of your comment in the agenda coming up. Mr. Weddleton.
Thanks. I guess a question to Crystal. So were there to be, say, 3 maps put out. So in an ordinance, they say, we put forward these 3 maps. And then, how would we handle that in a vote? I mean, you don't then just vote on approval of the ordinance because then you've approved 3 different maps. So, it seems like if there's one as a starting point and then, individuals or whatever, 2 or 3 assembly members come up with an alternative as an amendment, kind of gets you the same point, but it's more in a normal process. I just, if we present 3 in an ordinance, it's just like it's an odd starting place. How do you choose one of those 3? What would that be?
Well, I think it does come down to a simple which one is moved at that actual meeting. And if there's enough people that actually support that particular one, then it's a done deal. But I think that's where we actually would be having a better deliberative conversation if we were to know that there were options still. At least coming from the committee, maybe that's the the way to do it too. Is once those 3 come to the committee, there really are 3 different ones, and then it depends on, like I said, who moves which map. And, whether or not that one gets the votes. And if it doesn't get the votes, then somebody else moves one of the other maps. And anyway, kind of go through it that way.
So we definitely have a motion on the floor, and it contemplates doing it the other way. So any other individuals want to make comment before we proceed to vote? Hearing none. Madam Clerk, Mr. Rivera.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I guess just one last note, just based off what Ms. Kennedy stated in her concern. I would hope that if there is, if we do choose the one map route and there is significant opposition from a particular district, that there would be room to have some type of dissenting opinion be included in the record that outlines why, a particular district representative might be opposed to a map. And so that way, we have the one map, and then we have the various opinions. So that way everyone's concerns are heard, and that could lay the foundation for bringing an S version like Mr. Weddleton has stated. Thanks.
So I think the answer to that is both the issue you talk about just now, the S version that any member could bring forward, that we're just going to ask members provide early enough that it can be mapped properly and make sure we don't have glitches and errors going into the public process. And the traditional methodology for a dissent, I believe under assembly practice, is an assembly memorandum or an assembly information memorandum. And so it could also be an amendment of a phrase into the ordinance itself. And so the committee can work on that, and the members themselves who might find themselves having a substantive disagreement can choose which path is best for them. I think if legal wants to, Dean, if you want to comment if I missed anything there, but I think those are the pathways forward in the legislative process. Having not heard from Dean, I'm guessing I didn't say anything too terribly wrong because he would have jumped in. So next, I guess the question from the clerk, would you please conduct the roll of the 6 members? The question being, the committee will submit one map.
Mr. Chair, is it 5 members or 6 members?
It's 1 from each district, 6.
Okay, so I'm going and adding the 2 currently.
Yeah, we added them at the beginning of the meeting. Really, the chair and I had that discussion, and she added them previously.
Okay.
Just hadn't been briefed.
Okay. Mr. Constant?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Ms. Kennedy?
No.
Ms. Quinn Davidson?
Yes.
Mr. Rivera?
Yes.
Mr. Weddleton?
Yes.
And that passes 5-1.
Thank you. So Recognizing that this is a committee, the committee can, of course, change its mind when better information might be presented in the future. So this question could come back before us, but at this time, the decision by the body of the committee is to work towards a single map presentation, allowing members to provide substitute versions. I believe at a future committee meeting, we will I'll work with the contractor in the interim to kind of work out a timeline for that process so people have a really clear understanding of the time it's going to take to draft and vet and introduce substitute version. That information will be coming forward. So next, if any other comment on that item before we move on? Nope. Okay, Dennis, it's time for the Esri show. We're now on to item C on the agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For that, I'm going to turn it over to Ashley, who will screen share, I believe, and show the committee members how to use the tool.
Awesome. And I'll just a little predicate to this. We had previously discussed the possibility of funding a way for members of the public to implement in our system maps and do all this great work. And it proved to be very, very expensive, prohibitively expensive. And so what alternative we've come up with is we're going to be sharing with the public through our website various third-party tools and resources, which is item F on the agenda, to allow members of the public to take these maps and do the things that they want to do. So this viewer that you're about to see is a viewer that's going to be granted to members of the committee and other members of the assembly. I would assume we could get that many logins, but this isn't going to be a tool broadly available to the public. That said, the outputs of this will all be available to the public, and we are going to put third-party tools forward that the public can use that are very easy to understand and work with. So that's just a little predicate to this part of the conversation.
This is Ashley Reiser. I'll take over with the demonstration. So as just mentioned, the committee members and some others will be granted licenses to this software. We are limited to 15, which is another one of the constraints, as was just mentioned. So when you are granted a license, you will receive an email if you haven't already. I know there are 11 members currently within the system, so we have a good representation so far. You'll be granted a license and you will have an email with a link in it that will take you to this website to set up your password. I won't go through that currently because mine is already set up, but when you log in, you'll be taken to this as your home screen. This is an Esri software. It's a mapping software that's the industry leading software for all mapping purposes and certainly for web mapping. Within here, we have a gallery of maps, which is where, give it just a second to load. This is where any maps that have been produced by individuals with a license will be posted. And apologies because this is, of course, as the contractor, we have quite a few working maps in here, so it's a little bit clustered, but let me just sort it for you. So committee members will be able to come in and select a map that they would like to view. The map will have depending on which boundaries have been agreed for presentation, as mentioned, if they pass the compliance testing for meeting all of the deviation standards, they'll be presented here. If they do not meet the deviation standards, we will still have them in our system. We will have the data and we will have a log of the exact reasons why they did not meet the standards. So from here, I've set up one. These are just demonstrations right now. We don't have the maps published just yet, but that will come shortly. So for example, you could come in and click on map 1. This will open a map viewer that has been preloaded with data. And it shows the proposed district boundaries that we presented for map 1. This is, I'm just going to, what I'm doing now is I am currently on the reapportionment map website that is available to the public. So this is the map 1 that was presented to the public. And this is the digital version. But what this software allows you to do, which is helpful, is to really zoom in on these districts and view more local streets and that sort of thing. So it's a way to really dive into the data. We are looking at possibilities for disseminating this data more widely digitally. Currently, we have shape files that are available for the public to download so that they can take this exact data and put it in their system and do what I'm doing right now. So this is the way that we are proposing.
Actually, just briefly, I would note for folks that the shapefiles have been uploaded to the committee webpage. So you go to the muni.org, you go to the assembly page, you go to the committee's page, reapportionment committee, and then you drop down to, I think it's a documents page, right?
It's at the bottom of that table. There it is, right there.
There we go. There it is. So those are now available for the public at large.
And it's a zip file that will automatically download for you.
Perfect. Thank you, Ashley.
And so within this software, this is for viewing. So there isn't, this is not set up for commenting or any type of collaborative exchange in that way. But it is a very detailed way for the committee to go in and view all of the alternatives that have met the compliance and are available as potential boundaries.
And Ashley, this is Dennis. One of the questions we get is the ability to add the layer showing current boundaries versus proposed boundaries.
Yes, so this is the demo we set up just before this meeting. So what I've put in here are the boundaries for map 1. We will be updating this with all of the boundaries that are on the PDF map for the assembly, for the committee. And here, if you or any of the members wanted to add their own data, if you did have a shape file or something, you can add that here. So it gives you the ability to add your own data as well. But we will have it pre-populated, so that shouldn't be a concern. No one should need to add data. I will put in the caveat, this is not the software that allows you to determine deviations. So this is not a software that allows committee or assembly members to define new districts and evaluate them for compliance. This is just a viewing software for the districts that have already met compliance. The rest of these I won't screen share because they give information, usernames and such for the rest of the group. But within here, you can view other members of the organization. You can add accounts and such. But for purposes of this demonstration, this is really the nuts and bolts of it. It's a very simple tool to open up maps and visualize them. Are there questions on the software?
Any questions on the software? I think the thing people would like to do is discuss the next item, which is briefing on the maps. Unless anyone wants to put themselves in the queue now on the software element. Not seeing any at this time, so why don't we move on to item 4D, and that is a briefing on each map.
Okay, so as we discussed, the way that the public is accessing the maps is from the reapportionment website, clicking on the view maps, and then we have currently the first 5 preliminary maps that are being proposed. These are links to open the maps as PDFs. These can also be printed if desired. We are in the works of creating an updated version that has more street labels on it. So when it's printed, you'll be able to dive in a little bit deeper and look at local streets and things. With the way that this was set up, we were limited with room for the labeling, but we will be updating that. Map 1. Sorry, I was hoping I could get that all on the screen. So map 1, the change, and I'll go through this as far as describing the general changes that were made from the current district. you can see that the current district boundaries are in green. They're represented in green here. They're also represented in green with labels on this lower map. So for this particular map, for consideration, map 1, we have District 1 will incorporate JBER, whereas previously, as you can see by the boundary, it did not. So District 1 would incorporate JBER, and then District 2 would gain Girdwood, Bird, and Indian. And this is District 2 down here. And these are the major changes. As you can see, there are some other more subtle changes. Obviously, District 6 is pushing a little bit more northward as the other districts move north as well to accommodate that.
Could you briefly speak to the deviation? Just kind of put that in context.
Sure. So let me step back for the instructions. So on the site where you access the maps, it also gives you instructions for submitting maps. And as part of that, we have included the requirements that the public and us as the contractors developing these must comply with. The deviation, the population target deviation must be less than 10%. So the population target that we must obtain, or if we were to have no deviation, the population target for each district would be 48,541. So in order to be compliant, each district must be less than 10% of a deviation from this number. And also following the guidelines, if the district has a greater than 5% deviation, there must be a compelling reason why. So all of the 5 maps that we're viewing have met this target population, and you can view that within the deviation table, what their percent deviation was. Okay, are there questions on?
Yeah, but before you move on there, back to the deviations, the 5% and 10%, the deviation, for people to understand, it's a deviation from the lowest, the highest difference of under the ideal to the highest distance to over the ideal, right?
Correct.
Right, so it's all of those. The total percentage can't be more than 5% or 10%, right?
Correct.
Okay, so as you see, that's kind of how that works there. It's not really intuitive to understand that that's what they mean by the deviation. It's not the deviation of the individual district. It's deviation of the one district to the last district on that list.
Correct. Yes, sorry, that wasn't clear how I explained it. The total of these deviations.
Yep.
As absolute values.
Yep. For the statisticians and computer people, it's easy, but for the rest of us, it's kind of hard to wrap your mind around. Thank you. Any other questions?
Yes,
Mr. Chairman, this is, oh, sorry, Mr. Chairman, this is Dennis Wheeler, but I can wait till the questions.
Okay. Why don't you work on to the next map? Oh, wait, no, at the last minute, Mr. Weddleton popped himself in, so go ahead, John.
Well, I don't know if it's now would be the time for this discussion, but just looking at, this map 1 or option 1, whatever, so there's election in April, and I look at where I live, and at this point, there's only 2 candidates for District 6. And we would both be in this yellow area that's labeled 6. And I wondered then who would represent District 2? I mean, no candidate lives in there, that district.
So yes, it would, and this gets into.
Or is that Eagle River?
Yeah, exactly. This gets into a pretty subtle legal question, John, that we should tackle later, not now, but it's the question of the truncation and the question of what population shifts require that you do that or not, and all of that. So that gets into the very important legal issues that we'll have to sort out down the road. So I think that level of specificity is not for this briefing. This is an introduction to the maps, and we'll come back to the more in-depth conversation about each map at a time and place where that's more appropriate.
Yeah, no, that's fine. It just, anyway, thanks. Yep. That's fine.
Ms. Kennedy, go ahead. Crystal?
Yeah, I know. Sorry, my button response is slow. I guess I want to go back to the question of the deviation, the 10%. I mean, I certainly understand the 5% within each district, and I guess that's allowed as long as you have some extenuating circumstance that justifies that. But the 10%, my understanding is that's not really negotiable. You can't really go over the 10% total. And so I guess I want some clarification on that, because we have several maps that basically have a greater than 10% total deviation. So I just need some clarification on that. Thanks.
Who is best suited to answer that question? Is it Dennis or Dean?
Mr. Chairman, I volunteer Dean.
Dean, you are volunteered as tribute.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman, but no thank you, Mr. Wheeler. I thought when you started speaking, we were going to answer that question. I think on the 10% standard, you know, there is a case law that I've read in the past, and I think it's some other state, where going over 10% was permissible. But wow, you had to have such compelling reasons and circumstances that made it justifiable. And in general, I mean, my instinct is we wouldn't have any such circumstances in the municipality of Anchorage to do that. But so you're correct, Ms. Kennedy, as the general rule, don't go over 10%. But even if you do, for some good compelling reasons, that's likely to end up in court for the court to say, yeah, these are good reasons to justify it. But, you know, you really want to avoid that completely, is just my advice. So maybe Mr. Wheeler, if you had something to add, perhaps.
Thank you, Dean. Mr. Chairman, I was going to comment earlier and waited for questions, but my comment is that these maps are not endorsed by any committee member, and certainly not by the committee. These maps we created to spur the conversation about how the committee should approach expanding District 1 and some concept ideas. So to Ms. Kennedy's point, I wouldn't say that any one of these are drilled in enough to be considered perfect at all, or so really more conceptual. So we appreciate that they're not perfect.
I want to jump in and say, as we go through the maps, because we're going to run out of time here. We got half an hour and a couple of substantive items left. That we can point out which ones meet that 10% or higher, which I didn't realize any of them did. I thought they were all pretty tight. So let's just, if you don't mind, Ms. Kennedy, roll through the maps and point to the specific ones and raise those questions there.
Okay, I can do that. Thanks.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I was just going to make a general statement that if we're drawing these maps, I think the principle we need to keep in mind is to try to change them from the current districts as little as we can, because the voters are used to being in their current districts for a decade now, and there's going to be resistance from some of them to want to be moved to a different district, or and so I think if we can have the deviations from the current districts as small as possible, that would keep people cause fewer problems in the future.
Yeah, so Mr. Peterson, I totally can relate to that, and we have the outlier of the Proposition 12, which forces a major change, and so that major of a change cascades issues across every district. And so that said, that's one of the goals, is to keep things as harmonious as possible.
Thank you.
Map 2.
Okay, and so for map 2, the primary change that was introduced in this map was for District 1. And in this case, it expands southward and to the east, and then slightly pushes down District 4 as well. These are the major changes. I won't, as we said, we're kind of short on time, and these are available to anyone, public and within this meeting, so these can be viewed separately. So that's number 2. map 3. The major change here is the expansion again of District 1, east and south. And then District 5 is also being pushed down southward quite a bit. So that's a significant change to look for when viewing map number 3. Map 4, the primary change is with respect to JBear. It is split between District 1 and District 2. And then, so for the split, Elmendorf joins District 1 and Fort Rich joins District 2.
Well, I would offer
What
that
Sorry.
Richardson stays in District 2. Doesn't join it, it stays.
Correct, sorry.
That's good. Slight difference.
Ashley, can you tell me what map, Mr. Constant, if I can ask Ashley, what
Please.
map number is that, please? I'm
This
sorry.
is map number 4.
Thank you.
And for map number 5, the primary change, again, is with respect to JBear. So District 5 would incorporate JBear, and District 2 would gain a larger portion of Muldoon.
So I didn't see any of those maps that exceeded the 10%, and I didn't see any of them really. One that was close to 7%, I think. So, Ms. Kennedy?
Thanks. Yeah, actually, map 2 and 3 have the same population deviation summaries, so they're both at 10.25%.
Can we go back to those and see them?
Yes.
Okay, which actually, I guess maybe what the question might be is one of those incorrect? Because it's interesting that you could draw 2 different maps that have the exact same deviation in each of the same districts for both maps. So can we get that clarified first to make sure that's correct? Okay.
Yes, that was brought to my attention just before this meeting, and I have not had a chance to investigate that, but I will follow up.
Okay,
But
perfect.
how do you get to 10.25?
You add all the deviation percentages together. You don't add or subtract or add, you just add the numbers. So the whole area has a total of 10.25%. You don't get to do a plus and minus. It's not a typical math problem. It's just you add all the deviations in your district. Your overall district is not supposed to have, I shouldn't use the word district. The overall area, so the municipality shouldn't have anything more than a 10% deviation. And it's 10.25. It's not a big difference. It's not a big overage, but it is 10.25 if you add them all.
So to the contractors, Dennis and Ashley, would we add a 7th row and just have the deviation available there so it's standardized?
Good.
We can do that, Mr. Chairman. And to Ms. Kennedy, I think the way we view this is you look at the difference between the largest negative and the largest positive. So the difference between the -3 for District 2 and the positive 4.75 for District 5 is a spread of 7.75.
Yeah, that was my understanding. So, but we'll sort through that, and we'll definitely get to the legal question of how that's calculated. Go ahead, Crystal.
Thank you. If you look at historically what happened, if we look at the example that we actually use in the presentation for the 2012 reapportionment, they basically have a -5.2 and a +5.4, which gives a 10.6 deviation. So that was, that.
Yeah, so while we correct the mistaken information, Crystal, the table that seems to be duplicated, we will zoom in and get legal opinion and make sure that we have black and white answer back for that issue at the next meeting.
Okay, well, and just in terms of what gets added and really what is the deviation, probably should be clarified as well. Thanks.
Yeah, that's what we'll get that, how the methodology of calculating deviation is done. We'll have legal and the contractors make that determination and come up with a positive affirmative statement of how and why at our next meeting.
Mr. Chairman, if I might spend 30 seconds more on that.
Yeah, please.
Okay, let me know if you can see my screen.
You can, go ahead.
Okay, so I believe Assembly Member Kennedy is referring to this table in the fact sheet. So if you look at this, the lowest, if you will, negative is 5.2 and the highest positive is 5.4. The spread is the 10.6 between those two numbers. I believe that's how it's been done, and I believe we're being consistent with that approach. But as you said, we'll come back around to this if need be.
Yep, Ms. Quinn-Davidson states she can't see the screen. I can, Mr. Rivera can. Oh, now she's got it. Okay, good enough. So I think that the real answer to that question, Crystal, is we don't know the answer, but we will get back to you. That's a traditional attorney's answer, and we're going to stick to it.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Okay, so we've been through the maps now. People have had a basic understanding of how.
Mr. Constant.
Oh, okay, Mr. Rivera, missed you there. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So I just had a quick comment on the descriptors used in the maps. So as Ms. Kennedy stated earlier in the meeting, I believe I heard her state this, that both Eagle River and Midtown were the two districts that were most impacted. But I don't really see that reflected in any of the descriptors of the maps. And so this might seem nitpicky, but if there's any way to adequately reflect that in some of the maps, I think that would be helpful to easily convey the information to the public. Thanks.
Can you restate that, Felix? Specifically, what do you mean?
Yeah, so in a variety of the maps, District 4 is pretty heavily impacted. And so if you go to the maps, there's a descriptor there. District 1, this big change is happening. District 2, this big change is happening. But and some of them include District 5, but none of the maps include District 4. I don't see that included in any of the descriptors.
I gotcha. Oversight. We'll make sure that that's addressed. Thank you. And Mr. Gates, you are in the queue.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Regarding that example for 2012, the reapportionment that Ms. Kennedy was talking about, if I'm tracking right, there was some confusion about why that had a 10-point something deviation. And I think that the table that we were looking at there that was just on screen, I believe that that's the table that was used when the Assembly did the first step in looking at the current district boundaries from that map that was adopted in 2001 or something, and then census data from 2010, and then adding that census data. So the population's changed and shifted. So that table just showed current boundaries and said, yeah, I see that 10 point something over 10% total deviation means we're malapportioned. Right. And the resolution was passed based on that number. So that table isn't from the reapportionment maps that were done after that. So the reapportionment map, we had a really low deviation, total deviation. Anyway, the one that's published in code that was at the end of the process.
Perfect. That makes a lot of sense. Other questions before we move on? Hearing none, we will get a report back with a little more detail on the maps for each district substantive change, clarification on how we calculate deviation based on legal and mapping protocols. And we'll move on now to discussion on the process for public map submission review. So I'm not sure, Dennis, if you want to do this or if I should lead this one.
Oh, sorry, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Dean.
Yeah, while you were on that topic, I would say, when you look at the deviations and looking at the 5 maps, I see map 1's got a total of 1.15 and 2 and 3 that Ms. Kennedy pointed out 7.75. But one of the considerations and factors and elements that are considered when you're going to a larger total deviation is the compliance with the charter requirements for being compact continuous and social economically integrated areas. So when those factors say, well, you better should move the boundary here to keep the district compact or socially economic integrated area, and that would justify having a larger total deviation than like map 1's 1.15% deviation. So those are sort of the elements and factors that are looked at in a legal analysis.
Yep. So, and the legal question that we need to sort is the math, how we calculate that deviation, all those other subtle elements will come to. Ms. Kennedy.
Thank you. Sorry. And you know what? And I think it's true. I think we're supposed to be using not a total deviation, but a highest spread deviation. So that's probably just the terminology itself. But I think that's correct then, that those two maps, well, those two summary grids there, basically for map 2 and 3, come up to 7.75 if you just use the spread, not the total deviation. So anyway, it's a semantics or a terminology thing for me. So
I imagine though, Crystal, I imagine it's a legal question and we'll get it answered.
All right, thank you.
So, okay, we are running out of time. We have about 13 minutes left for the committee. We have a couple substantive items and we need to hear from the public. So, discussion of process for public map submission. Dennis, are you prepared for that? And Dean, your hand is still up. Okay, good.
Mr. Chairman, I am, yes.
Okay, fire away.
Okay, there are two primary ways to submit. One of them Ashley touched on earlier, and I'm screen sharing again. I'll wait a couple of seconds here for it to pop up. I know at least one member said they didn't pop up very quickly.
It's up for me.
Oh, okay, so the map submission instructions are right here. This is on the second page of the Reapportionment Committee website. Underneath the map table, there's the instructions. If you want to get a map in and analyzed, you can send the GIS shapefile to this address, and we'll be coordinating with Claire, et cetera, to make sure that we get that map analyzed and make it available. There's some free tools out there for the public to use to build their own maps if they want to. These are the 3 sites that are available. I have no particular endorsement for any one over another. So that's one way to do it, through this process. Another way to do it would be through the public comment portal we've set up for comments. When you, let me back up one page here. Okay. So on the Reapportionment Committee website, there's a public comment portal. When you hit submit a comment here, it takes you to this page where a person can put in their identifying information, and they can add in, when they do it, they can upload a map file if they want to. And there's some format restrictions here in terms of what you can do through this portal, in terms of the file type. So if you want to unload a GIS shapefile, this would not necessarily be the best way for you to get your map to the committee. But it is another alternative.
So, and I'm going to dive in there. That's the technical process for submitting comments and for submitting maps. And then really this harkens back the next part, which is process for public map submission review. The contractor will conduct a preliminary review like they did with the other maps and determine whether they meet the basic legal standards and parameters that are required, those 5 bullets there. And then the intent is for us to see them at the town hall and hear input from the public. And then we will have that meeting on the 28th and beginning then to address our review process. So if members of the committee have input for how we should conduct our review of those maps, it's time to start thinking about it, preparing notes, and maybe submitting notes to the chair or to the contractor, to Claire, to begin having your thoughts on how we should be reviewing maps if you have any. Otherwise, that's the way it's going to work. And so then comes, any questions on that? Okay, currently no questions. The next item F is a discussion of third-party resources and websites. So one of the things that became apparent is that There are a lot of interested entities out there making comments, writing up blog posts, and doing stuff on this question. These are not official communications of our assembly committee or the body or anything, but it's germane information to the process. So the question was asked, should we create a place on our website to post information sources that are third party so people can, when they're coming to our page, see kind of a news feed, if you will, of commentary that's happening out in the public. This could be, you know, I'll just lead with one of them that somebody suggested. Must Read Alaska was one of them. AK Politics was another one. All of these various groups that are doing work. Do we want to host a place for clearinghouse for that? And if so, we just need to have a discussion about that now. Ms. Quinn Davidson.
Thanks, Mr. Constant. My concern about that would be then I would feel some obligation to review the content and make sure that we weren't unintentionally sharing inaccurate content, no matter where it might come from. So I think I would be pretty uncomfortable linking to third parties that we're not reviewing.
Yeah, and that certainly was one of the conversations we had. That, you know, the practical methodology would be a disclaimer right at the top. These are third party, it's not been vetted, etc. But your concern is a valid one, and it's certainly why we have to have this talk now. Do other members have a concern, consideration, a thought?
Mr. Chair.
Ms. Kennedy?
Yeah, I think we have to make them accessible for people to at least look at, because otherwise there's no point in actually even offering or giving the invitation to the public to create something other than what we already have, you know, the 5 maps that we already have.
Oh, no, this is slightly different, Ms. Kennedy. I'm not talking about the maps. All of the maps that are submitted will be published. That's not a question at all. If they meet the valid standards of the contractor putting it in, you know, compact, contiguous, deviations and all. We're talking about is third-party analysis, third-party commentary, like news sites and blogs, right? Do we want to create a place here where we have like a news feed of information that is being said by third parties in the community? The point Ms. Quinn Davidson made is we don't have any way of validating it's accurate information. We don't want to be a purveyor of misinformation. Another way to get there is a disclaimer across the top. We make no position on the validity of any of this information, but these are the things being said in the public. Just kind of a news feed.
Okay, yeah, I don't think we need to do that. I mean, I think people need access to the maps themselves, but any kind of commentary should be their own anyway, so.
Okay, Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with Ms. Quinn Davidson. I just think that approach could we'd get down in the weeds, and I just think the public might be misled a little bit, or when the information, we don't know how accurate it'll be. I just think I think we need to go forward with our with our own maps and let the third party people get their information out on their own.
So is there any counter opinion to that by members of the committee?
I do have a question, Mr.
Please.
Chair. So are we saying that we are going to put our own commentary on our maps?
No.
Yeah, so in other words, nobody's going to make any comments on anything. We're just going to provide access to any and all maps.
Well, there's that, but there's the public comment portal for public comments. Yes, that's available and going to happen. What we're talking about is a clearinghouse for third-party commentary on the maps. And I'm generally hearing the answer is no. Claire, you have your hand raised?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, it doesn't sound like there's interest, but I think maybe calling it third party is maybe the wrong term. Maybe it would be something media coverage, which could get hard if there's a lot, but you know, you could put any ADN articles, Must Read Alaska, any blog posts that have been made on it. Just, I don't know, it does seem like a good way to do outreach so people know there's not gonna be high coverage of this issue probably in the next 3 months, but I get what the members are saying. It doesn't sound like there's interest.
Yeah, and I didn't hear any strong advocates. We just had to put the question on the table. And at this point, I think the answer is let's just have our published, accurate, official information on our official website, not any third-party clearinghouse. So we're just going to move forward with that assumption unless someone comes forward with an alternate opinion and very strongly. We have a few more items on the agenda. Timeline updates we addressed. communication plan updates. Crystal, I can give you a minute to talk about it.
Okay, sorry, you just want me to talk about yesterday?
Yep.
Yeah.
We're running out of
You
time.
know-
I definitely want to give the public opportunity to speak, so we have to be just brief.
Okay, great. Well, Claire was great. She brought all the materials out, had everything ready to go. So that was a big help. She coordinated with the chamber to have everything available so we could just do the PowerPoint. And so anyway, so that was great. I do have a couple comments on, I think, how we can make the PowerPoint a little bit better, but I can, you know, I haven't really had the chance to talk with Claire about any of those details. So I'll get with her about that. But the community, you know, I think having the maps there in big colored graphics, you know, really that's what people want to look at. So I think they weren't quite as interested in some of the process stuff as they were okay, where's the map and how do I comment kind of a thing. So anyway, we can talk a little bit more about how to fine tune the presentation when I'm assuming you'll do that, Mr. Chair. When we do that with the town hall meetings. But I think overall, the other thing that was really helpful too was the fact that we are putting those maps on display in the library so that when people have time on their own, they can go by and look at them. But I will say, you know, I've been on the website several times and it's great. I think the maps come up really nice and clear. You can even expand them so that you can get into some detail. So that's really helpful too. I think one of the things that I had a question about just in terms of maps altogether was if we could have some kind of main roads on J-Bear that were identified, because there's one map where J-Bear is split between Elmendorf and Fort Rich, and it's a little hard. I mean, I'm assuming it's a pretty clear line between housing areas, but it would be nice to have some kind of reference on J-Bear so that when people are actually looking at anything that has anything to do with J-Bear kind of knows what they're looking at. So.
Yep. Ms. Kennedy, thank you. The note on the road is the next round of maps that they're going to present to us are going to have a next level of detail, which are going to not get down to neighborhood streets exactly, but somewhere between the main thoroughfares and the neighborhood streets, people are going to be able to see where the lines are. So that is coming up.
Yep. That's it.
Can I ask for a motion to extend 5 minutes?
Move to extend 5 minutes.
Second.
Is there any objection? Hearing none, we're extended to 12:35. Thank you. Do you have any last comments on that, Ms. Kennedy?
No, not really. That
Okay.
was brief enough, I hope. Thanks.
I do ask for you to submit your comments on the PowerPoint to Claire this week because I'm doing a presentation next week and could use the benefit of your experience to improve the presentation I'll be delivering next week.
Absolutely. Thanks.
Thank you. And again, others, if you are intending to make presentations, let us know, get on the calendar, and we'll make sure you have a full wealth of information, that this information gets out there broadly. Budget issues at this time, we won't be briefing on any. There may be some concern or consideration about making a secondary reappropriation of funds already appropriated for finishing out the contract with RDI just by virtue of some budgetary issues, but it wouldn't be new money. And we don't have any plan for that at this time. And then again, the state final plan adoption is in litigation at this time with no further report to be made. Finally, we have now 6 minutes, so we have enough time for a couple of people to participate from the public. Any member of the public wish to be heard. If you are on the phone, you would hit *6 to unmute yourself. Anyone from the public, now is your opportunity. Okay, I am seeing and hearing no members of the public who wish to be heard, so we didn't need that extension. Any last comments? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
We are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.